In 338 BCE, on a dusty plain outside the Greek city of Chaeronea, the most feared fighting force in the ancient world was destroyed. Not by a superior army, not by treachery, not by disease. It was destroyed by love. Or at least, that is what the ancient sources tell us. 300 soldiers, paired as lovers, had never lost a single battle in nearly 4 decades. They had humiliated Sparta. They had reshaped the map of Greece. And when they finally fell, they fell together. Every single one of them. Refusing to retreat, refusing to surrender, dying side by side in the same formation in which they had lived and trained and fought. By the end of this video, you will understand not only who these men were, but why their story was buried, distorted, and reduced to a footnote, and what it reveals about the ancient world that most history textbooks still cannot bring themselves to say plainly. To understand the Sacred Band of Thebes, you first have to understand what Greece looked like in the early 4th century BCE. This was not a unified nation. Greece was a patchwork of competing city-states: Athens, Corinth, Argos, Sparta, each with its own laws, its own gods, its own social codes. And Sparta, at this moment, was the dominant military power on the Greek peninsula. Sparta had just won the Peloponnesian War in 404 BCE, dismantling the Athenian Empire after nearly 3 decades of conflict. By 380 BCE, Spartan hegemony felt permanent, immovable, almost cosmological, like a fact of nature rather than a political arrangement. Their soldiers, the Spartiates, trained from the age of 7. They slept in barracks until the age of 30. They were the most disciplined infantry force the Mediterranean world had ever produced. No Greek city-state had beaten them in open battle in living memory. The idea that a force of 300 men from Thebes, a city most Greeks considered a second-tier power, could change that calculus seemed, to most observers of the time, frankly absurd. But in 378 BCE, a Theban general named Gorgidas assembled exactly that force. 300 soldiers, selected not by lot, not purely by physical ability, but specifically paired, each man bonded to another man as his closest companion, his lover, his partner in the deepest sense the Greek language offered. The ancient Greek word was erastes and eramenos, the older, more experienced partner, and the younger, though historians note that within the sacred band, these roles were likely more fluid, more equal than the standard pederastic model that governed much of Greek social life. Gorgidas initially distributed these pairs throughout the broader Theban army, seeding the ranks with what he believed would be nodes of extraordinary courage. The logic was explicit and was recorded by the historian Plutarch, writing in the 1st century CE. A man will die before showing cowardice in front of someone he loves. Shame, in the ancient Greek moral framework, was one of the most powerful forces in existence, and shame before a beloved was more powerful still. It was Gorgidas's successor, a general named Pelopidas, who recognized that distributing the sacred band across the army was wasting its potential. Around 375 BCE, Pelopidas consolidated the 300 into a single independent strike unit, and the difference was immediate. At the Battle of Tegyra in 375 BCE, a small engagement that most general histories skip entirely, the sacred band encountered a Spartan force that outnumbered them significantly. The Spartans reportedly asked, with genuine contempt, where the Thebans thought they were going. Pelopidas answered by charging directly into them. The sacred band broke the Spartan line. 2 Spartan commanders were killed. It was the first time in recorded Greek history that a Spartan force had been defeated by a smaller Greek army in a straight infantry engagement. The shock across Greece was profound. Plutarch records that the Spartans themselves were stunned, not just by the defeat, but by its source. But this is still not the battle that defines the sacred band. That comes 7 years later, at Leuctra in 371 BCE. And here is the detail that most retellings flatten or omit entirely. The sacred band at Leuctra was not just a component of the Theban victory. It was the instrument of a tactical revolution. The Theban general Epaminondas placed his strongest troops, including the Sacred Band, on the left flank rather than the right, which violated every convention of Greek warfare. The right flank was where you put your best men. It was almost a law of the battlefield. By inverting this, Epaminondas created a weighted hammer. The Sacred Band and the elite Theban infantry crashed into the Spartan right flank, where the Spartan king Cleombrotus himself was stationed, before the rest of the line had even made contact. The Spartans lost approximately 400 Spartiates that day, including the king. In a society where the total number of full Spartan citizens had already declined to perhaps 1,000 men, losing 400 in a single afternoon was catastrophic. Sparta never fully recovered. The Sacred Band, 300 men, had cracked the spine of the most feared military power in the Greek world. And the ancient sources are unambiguous. Plutarch, Athenaeus, and the 4th century historian Xenophon, who hated Thebes and would have loved to diminish this, all record the Sacred Band's role at Leuctra. The facts are not in dispute. Now here's where the story becomes more complicated, and where historians begin to disagree. The ancient sources describe the bond between Sacred Band soldiers in terms that range from deep friendship to explicit erotic love. Plutarch, in his Life of Pelopidas, written around 100 CE, states directly that the band was composed of lovers and their beloved, and attributes this arrangement to the philosopher Plato's idea that the best army would be one composed of lovers. He quotes the Theban general Pamenes as saying that Homer's Nestor was a poor tactician for arranging his troops by tribe and clan because he should have placed lover next to beloved. These are not modern interpretations layered onto neutral ancient texts. These are the ancient texts. The question historians debate is not whether these bonds existed, but what they meant within their specific cultural context, and whether projecting the modern concept of homosexuality onto ancient Greek relationships is itself a form of distortion. The Greek world did not have a concept of sexual orientation as an identity. What it had was a set of social practices, some of them highly codified, around male bonding, mentorship, and physical intimacy, that were integrated into civic and military life in ways that have no clean modern equivalent. So when we ask, were the Spartans gay, or in this case, the Thebans, the honest answer is that the question itself is slightly the wrong shape. The better question is, what did these relationships mean to them, on their own terms? And on their own terms, the relationship between Sacred Band soldiers was treated with extraordinary seriousness. There is archaeological evidence from Thebes itself, inscriptions, dedications at sanctuaries, that record pairs of men in terms typically reserved for the most significant human bonds. The sanctuary of Aeolus, a hero associated in myth with Heracles, and described in several ancient sources as Heracles' beloved companion, was located just outside Thebes. Plutarch records that Theban pairs swore their oaths of loyalty at this sanctuary. Aeolus, the nephew and companion of Heracles, was a figure who embodied the ideal of the warrior companion, and the fact that Theban soldiers chose this particular shrine, rather than a shrine to Ares, the god of war, or Zeus, is significant. It tells us something about how they understood their own bonds, not as incidental to their military identity, but as its foundation. The silence that followed the Sacred Band's destruction at Chaeronea in 338 BCE is almost as remarkable as their history. Philip II of Macedon, who commanded the forces that destroyed them, and whose 18-year-old son Alexander commanded the cavalry charge that broke the Theban line, reportedly wept when he walked among the dead. Plutarch records his words. Philip saw that all 300 had died facing forward, their wounds on the front of their bodies, and he said, and this is Plutarch's account, written 4 centuries after the event, so it should be treated as a tradition rather than a transcript, that any man who thought these men had done or suffered anything shameful should perish miserably. It is a remarkable statement to attribute to a Macedonian king. Whether Philip said it or not, the tradition preserved it. Someone thought it was important enough to remember. After Chaeronea, Thebes was subjugated. The Sacred Band was never reconstituted. Alexander went on to conquer most of the known world, and the story of the men who had once humiliated his father's kingdom was gradually absorbed into the larger narrative of Macedonian triumph. The Roman period brought new moral frameworks. Not uniform condemnation of same-sex bonds, the Romans were complicated on this, but a gradual reordering of what was considered admirable about the Greek past. By the time Christian writers began engaging with classical history in the 3rd and 4th centuries CE, the erotic dimension of Greek male bonding was increasingly something to explain away, reframe, or simply not mention. The Sacred Band survived in texts, but those texts were read selectively. Plutarch was copied and preserved by Byzantine monks, who found his moral essays useful, but the passages about the Sacred Band's erotic bonds were rarely the ones that generated commentary. In 1818, near the village of Chaeronea in central Greece, a large burial mound was excavated. Inside, archaeologists found the remains of approximately 254 men, arranged in 7 rows, with grave goods consistent with 4th century BCE soldiers. The site is now identified as the burial place of the Sacred Band. The bones were laid out with care. There was no haste in the burial, no mass grave disorder. Someone had taken time with these dead. The Lion of Chaeronea, a large stone lion that stands near the burial site and was reconstructed in the 19th century from fragments found scattered across the site, had originally marked this tomb. It is one of the largest funerary monuments in the ancient Greek world. The men who built it were making a statement about what these soldiers deserve to be remembered as. What the Sacred Band of Thebes reveals is not simply that same-sex relationships existed in the ancient world. That has never been seriously in doubt among historians. What it reveals is that such relationships were, in at least one documented case, treated as the structural foundation of the most effective military unit in the ancient Greek world. The bond between these men was not incidental to their courage. It was, according to the people who created the unit, the source of it. That argument, that love makes soldiers braver, not weaker, was made explicitly, in writing, by people who lived in that world and watched it work. The Sacred Band won battles for 39 years. They were finally stopped not by a superior philosophy, but by a larger army and a cavalry charge led by a 19-year-old who would become Alexander the Great. If that story feels like it belongs in the center of ancient military history, rather than a footnote, you are not wrong. The fact that it has spent centuries on the margins tells us less about the ancient world and more about the long, slow process by which later cultures decided which parts of the past were worth remembering. The Sacred Band is worth remembering, in full, without euphemism, without the softening that turns lovers into close companions and erases the thing that made them extraordinary. History tends to survive in the stories people choose to keep telling. If this one stayed with you, consider keeping it alive.